Hey viewers, this is James Floyd Kelly. Welcome to another episode of Novel Ideas. I'm here with my friend Eric Wex. Eric, how you doing?
I am doing great. You're going to see me there. I am.
There you are. Hey viewers, you may notice that I can't tell with Eric's, but I can definitely tell with mine. The video quality might be a little darker. That's because it's summer, and Eric and I have had to move our podcast, our recording times to night. And so I'm not getting any nice sunlight into my office. So it looks very dark in my image here.
Jim and I share the fact that we are, at this point, somewhat the primary caregivers for the kids. Both of our wives work outside the home. And so, you know, when you got kids in the summer, times change when you can do things. So we're...
Yep, they're being put to bed right now by my wife. And I'm like, okay, it's time to go talk to Eric. And I turned it on. I look outside. It's dark outside. And I'm like, But you know what? It's okay. It's summer. We can change it up. So, but anyway, viewers, welcome again to Novel Ideas. We have a really interesting one today. Eric and I have been sort of talking about this on the side. We're going to talk about the page count myth, right?
Yes. This idea that there is a standard that you have to meet each day to be a real writer.
Yeah. I mean, you know what? And I'll be honest. When I first started writing back in 2006, when I wrote my first book, I had no idea what.
You still there?
Not a clue.
Hang on.
There you are.
So we don't have any viewers. Hang on for a second, okay? I think I have an idea, and I will definitely edit this. I will guess that my kids are using my bandwidth on my side, and I'm going to go get them off the internet, and we'll keep going.
Okay.
Hey, kids, I need you off all of your internet. I need you off the internet now. Okay? Just Spotify message. We just turn the radio off on all that stuff. Everything we need to Wi-Fi, you guys on. Just for a little bit. Thank you. Dead air, dead air, dead air.
I never thought about that. My kids are in bed, so I'm the only one on the internet right now, but I didn't think about that. You have kids playing games probably and stuff.
Yeah, so. I'm sure I have kids using bandwidth down there. So let's go back to what you were saying, because I didn't catch any of that statement, and I'll just edit right before you started talking.
Okay. So what I was, let me just start over here. For me, as a nonfiction writer, when I first started writing in 2006, my first book, I had no clue what I was doing. I had no clue how many pages a day I should be turning in or how many words I should be turning in. And so I did what a lot of writers do. I went and Googled some of writers and just tried to figure out what their writing schedule was. And it scared the pants off me because I was reading about these writers who were producing, 5,000 words a day, 10,000 words a day. And I wasn't producing that, and it made me feel bad.
Even 2,000 is, I think, incredibly intimidating when you're a new writer, right? That's hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, in a good day now, and I can write a book about every 2 months. That's about my writing schedule for nonfiction technology books. But going at that pace, I'm still lucky if I can get maybe 3,000 words a day. If I hit 3,000 words a day, I'm doing cartwheels.
So, for me, as a creative writer, I mentioned, let me just ask this question. Your research is done up front, right? So when you say draft, that's just straight drafting at that point, and you know what you're going to say. So I am a hybrid between a discovery writer and an outliner. Yes, I outline, but there are large portions of it where, particularly with character voicing, I find that most compelling when I discover it. And so there are times, and I'm also kind of a stickler for integrating stuff. So there are times where I will stop and think. And I might get 700 words a day for a while. And then, I had a day recently where that story had been in my head and it was ready to come out, and I did 4,000 words. But that process of, I'm not the writer who's always going to get 2,000 words a day, and that's hard. The day where I am using that brain power to create, and I'm slowing down and taking notes, and I'll give you an example of what I did today. I actually ended up. I'm thinking of my science fiction universe right now, and I'm working on a proposal for a comic book in that universe, and I spent a lot of time researching consumer goods distribution under Stalin, because it's the same kind of system. It's one corporation that runs everything. And how did they distribute consumer goods when you have one corporation running everything? And what were the problems that happened? And what were shortages like? And I'm imagining how my characters can interact in that world. That meant spending time on Wikipedia and other places reading about what it was like to stand in bread lines in Leningrad, right? And all that stuff. So,
yeah. You know, I think one thing that new writers that are getting started writing fiction or nonfiction, the funny thing is when they go out to the internet and they start looking at what sort of the standard is for word count and stuff like that, I think they forget the fact that when you find a writer who is published who gets interviewed about their word count, they have polished. They have reached a point in their career where their word count can't be compared to a beginning word count. They're a professional.
I think that's really well said, and I think that's something that's really well said.
I mean, if they go on if they interview a novice writer and say, how many words do you get in a week, and the novice writer says, I get about 500 a day. Woohoo! You know, most beginning writers can do that.
Right. Now, you know, and I think I could step back and I would say there's an important piece here. I mean, you know, I imagine people watching this podcast could say, okay, why are they talking about it? Great. Okay, so we know the facts that a beginning writer doesn't write as much. Now I don't have to feel guilty. Is that all you're trying to say? And I want to say it actually, I think, goes a little bit deeper, because I think what happens to the new writer who is determined to become a professional is that, I think for me, I got focused on trying to get word count up. That's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Writing efficiency is important. It's, you know, by struggling for a higher word count per day, I learned a lot of skills that are useful. But it's not the only thing that matters. So where this can start hampering you is when you're not madly typing because you know exactly what you want to say. I think you can start feeling, you know, like you're not being productive. And that's where it gets problematic, you know. There are other phases to the writing process, including I heard a writer once describe it as staring at the wall. Mm-hmm. That is an important part of the creative writing process, that you just let your mind do what it needs to do. It's spring. I've been weeding my garden beds, you know, between bouts of writing. I'll walk out the door and I'll weed a garden bed, because that helps me do something with my hands where my brain is not engaged. I'm also listening to podcasts, which is another way that I just allow myself to disengage. If you haven't listened to Hardcore History, it is one of the top-rated podcasts on iTunes, and the guy is a fabulous storyteller. He's just finished up a series on World War I called The Blueprint for Armageddon. Fascinating. About 18 hours of him talking about World War I. So there's, you know, that's something that I'm doing right now in between. Also, reading is another thing that is actually productive. We've had Natanya on here talking about that. But don't forget to be reading other people's writings. It will help you.
But you know, Eric, there's one thing that you and I, because we've published books, we kind of know this happens. There are times when you're not writing, when you're still being productive, but there's also times when you're not writing and you're honest with yourself, and you can admit, you know what, you're procrastinating. You're avoiding.
Yes.
And a professional can identify that and know when they're procrastinating versus just, you know, mulling things over.
And don't you think some of that procrastination comes because you're afraid of the word count?
Absolutely.
Like this is, again, it's another reason to talk about this, right? Like anything that intimidates you about the project gets in the way of the creativity, it gets in the way of getting the drafting done. It changes the quality of the drafting. You know, when you're totally freaked out in your head, you're not writing the best quality draft. Now, it's not as bad as your head is telling you, right? Your head is telling you it's the worst thing you've ever written when you're feeling like the writing is tough. that's not the case, but often it's not as good. So, you know,
in my case, when I find myself in that boat, it's usually I don't know where I'm going with the next chapter.
I think that's really well said, right? Yeah, that when we're stuck staring at the page, you know, often it means that we have something that we don't know, and we need to step back and figure out what it is that we don't know and work on knowing it. So again, for me, that was today. That was getting somewhere and going, okay, I need to understand before I can write about smugglers in the Unity. I got to know how distribution of products works. I got to know what their vision of that would be and what's an organization that would be similar. And I went to Stalinist USSR. I thought that was probably a pretty good picture of the years that I was trying to write in for the Unity and the Galaxy as a whole. Scary times.
Yeah. You know, there's sort of a tangent relation here because this is another thing that I know that when I was a new writer, I would find myself doing is that I went on this idea because I'd read it somewhere that if you're not writing, your butt is in the seat anyway. And I think sometimes that pays off, but I've learned over the years that, you know what, when I'm not in the mood to write, I'm not sitting in the chair wasting my time. A lot of writers read that, you know, they read these how-tos and what the famous writers are doing, and you'll hear the famous writers say, at 8 o'clock, whether I'm inspired or not, I've got my butt in the seat and my fingers on the keyboard, and I'm prepared to write. Good for you, but I know for me, I used to think that way, and I quickly learned that what'll happen is you'll end up sitting there for 4 hours.
Staring at the screen, doing nothing.
Yeah.
So what, like, there's two sides to that card, right? Because there's the other side of it, and I know the writers who are saying, sit your butt in the seat every day and write something. Just put something on paper. What they're thinking of is the writer who's like, I'm waiting for my muse.
Right.
I've had a novel half finished for 15 years, and I'm waiting for my muse to help me finish it. And I think that that's also problematic in that sense of putting a barrier of it's not good enough, or it will never be good enough, or I have to have it perfect in front of yourself, and then coming with excuses not to finish, right? So that's a form of procrastination. But then there is this, I think what you say is really, really true, and I think it needs to be said more, right? Is that you can sit in front of the screen and stare at it, and it's not productive time. You would be better off, in my case, washing dishes and cleaning the kitchen, out in my garden, mowing my lawn, running a kid to school, doing some kind of errand or something where my mind is off writing for a while to allow it to percolate. The other thing that I do sometimes when I face this thing about, let's say I'm trying to get word count done and I got a deadline and I can't figure stuff out. This is where having writing buddies matters. You know, a while back in season 1, we had James, who's kind of my writing buddy, on here. And we will grab Google Hangout halfway through a day, and he will call me up, or I'll call him up and be like, I can't figure out what to do with this plot point. You know this story best beside me. What can we do? And we'll brainstorm ideas. And that is a fantastic way to get out of it. I usually don't do what he comes up with. But frankly, the process, I hate to say this is somewhat my kind of narcissistic personality, but the process of getting irritated at his ideas, sometimes going, no, that's not what I want. No, that's not what I want.
It lights a fire.
It winnows out a whole bunch of things. And I'm like, oh, this is what I need to do. And then there are many other times where he like nails it. And I'm like, oh, well, that's exactly what I need to do. And then I run with it too. So.
And you know what? I do the exact same thing. I don't have a writing buddy. With nonfiction, I usually only deal with my editor. So I do. Sometimes when I get stuck, I'll call my editor and say, hey, man, this chapter is kicking my butt. I can't figure out how to get from A to C. I can't get the B part. And usually my editor will offer up something that I while he or she is talking, I'm going, not a chance. Nope. But it puts a seed in there that there's something fighting that. I can't use their idea, so I got to come up with something better. So hopefully my editors aren't watching this.
A classic, well, I know, but I think that's exactly right, because it's not often that we do take, you know, when it's one of the classic ideas about what you not to do in a writer's group. You don't tell other people how to fix their writing, right? I don't think we often take other people's writing ideas, but what we can do is let them be a kind of a spark of inspiration to get us to move forward.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think the takeaway here for our viewers is, you know, we call this the page count myth. but it really is ultimately just part one of a number of myths involving writers. So there's a lot of myths, and we can probably touch on some of those later on. But this is a big one because new writers tend to think the only way that they're going to get their story out is if they put out 3,000 words a day, 7 days a week, and it doesn't work like that. At least not in my world, and apparently not in your world.
And I think it doesn't. And I think there's a lot of pressure, whether it's NaNoWriMo, which can put pressure to do this kind of thing, or just looking at what a writer should be doing. And a lot of great up and coming writers who have the passion and desire to do it look at themselves and go, I can't do that. Or the other side is that they may be doing it, but it might not be quality writing too, right? You can spew words on page as fast as you can think of them, and you can learn to get your editor out of the way, which in general is a good thing. But an editor is there to check you to make sure that you don't publish stuff that's really not ready to be published. So, there is this place where you want to make sure that the words that do go on the page have some value, and whether that's in the first, and I'll tell you something, I'm one of those believers in it's a lot easier to get the right words on the first page, on the page the first time or shortly after the first time. Like I'm always constantly editing what I've just written and then moving forward, and then editing what I've just written and moving forward. That's the way I write. So for me, I like that a lot better than trying to write a whole draft and come back and fix it. So
now I'll flip this around. I'll flip this around on you, and I will say that I've been writing full time since about 2010. For me, as I've written more books, I have zeroed in on a word count that I usually will get when I'm feeling productive.
Yep.
If I sit down on my machine and I'm ready to go and I know I'm going to write a chapter today or half a chapter today, I usually know time-wise and just distraction-wise how many words I'm going to average that day. And I'm usually pretty good about it now. Not so much years ago, but now I can do it.
For me, I know when my brain's going to go fuzzy. So if I don't run into something that I don't have to research, for me at this point in time, it's 2,300 words. And it's almost dead on. I hit around 20. Y'all be like, oh man, my brain's worn out. I'll look down and be like really close to 2,300 words every time when my brain gets kind of messed up. And I need to stop. I need to either if I'm going to hit it again, I got to go take a serious nap, go do some other stuff, and then I can come back to it. But yeah, I get that. Yep.
And you mentioned something a minute ago that I think needs to be said. You mentioned NaNoWriMo, which is National Novel Writers Month. It's every November, and the goal of it is you sign up and you get 30 days or roughly 29 or 28 days to write a 50,000 word novel or novella. I will say this: I know a lot of writers who have done NaNoWriMo, and the one thing I think NaNoWriMo can teach a new writer is they can learn what they can put out. You'll have great days where you can prove to yourself you can make 4,000, 5,000 words, but you'll also have days where you're putting out consistently 1,200 or 2,000. NaNoWriMo probably is a great way for a new writer to test themselves and see what they're capable of.
I think that can be true for some writers.
Some writers, yeah.
I think NaNoWriMo lends itself to a discovery writer a lot better than it does to an outliner. So if you're someone who wants to plan something and then execute it, NaNoWriMo is probably not something for you to participate in. We should probably figure out how we could come up with an equivalent for those of us who outline. Because the people who thrive well, and I'll be honest, I think the one I think benefit, like you said, is you can test yourself and find out how many words per day you can put out. You can also find out that you can actually finish a book. Those are the things that NaNoWriMo can teach you. Right?
That's right.
But I've read some of these novels that come out from NaNoWriMo, and they're shoebox novels, right? They belong under the bed, and they can have germs. Man, I read one where I just adored the characters, but straightening the plot out became a bear because the plot hadn't been organized before the novel was started. So this writer that I was working with had a really hard time then going back and figuring out what the plot would be to make it straight. Yeah,
that's true. Hey, listen, we're out of time, but before we go, I have one other one I wanted to get your quick opinion on.
Yeah.
Just last week, you may have heard the news about Scalzi signed a what was it, a 10-book deal, 13 books in 10 years.
Wow.
Is that what it was? Yeah, It was like 4.3 million. Maybe it was 3.4 million. I think it was 4.3 million dollars. And he took a lot of heat from a lot of indie writers who said, you undervalued your writing. You could have made so much more by self-publishing. And I thought, he doesn't have to design the covers. He doesn't have to do the editing. He doesn't have to promote the books. He doesn't have to self-market. There's something to be said for getting paid $4 million and saying, hey, we want your next 13 books, and you've got 10 years to do it.
Yep. I also think, though, I would never, personally, even if somebody offered me $4 million, I would probably never sign that deal. Because for me to predict a decade from now what I'm going to care about in writing is something that I would be very leery of doing. And I know that I'm not at the point yet where I'm comfortable. Maybe it's because I haven't had success, right? In fiction, right? I've had a lot of success in nonfiction, huge success in nonfiction. But in fiction, I haven't had a lot of success, and I'm not sure I would want to tie myself for a decade to anything.
Well, a lot of people criticized him by saying he was cutting himself short. He could make so much more money as a self-publishing. But I think what people are forgetting is the 4.3 million is the advance. That's what he's getting paid to write the books. He'll make royalties on those books that will be far greater than 4.3 million. So that's, if you had asked me, hey, would you write 10 books or 13 books over the next 10 years for 4.3 million plus royalties? There's something to be said for that, especially if you got the skill and the story, the worlds that Scalzi has built. I can see a Red Shirts 2 coming. I'm telling you, he's going to do it.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. I just finished Old Man's War. I would love to see a sequel to Old Man's War. Right. Love the one.
Oh, he's written.
Oh, he's written.
Oh, no, he's on book 5 or 6 of the Old Man's War. Yeah.
What am I thinking? I need to go grab the second one.
Yeah, I used to know the titles. I mean, I like Scalzi. Don't get me wrong. I've read all his stuff, but I liked Red Shirts, but I don't reread them every year, so I've forgotten. But yeah, there's Old Man's War, and then there's like 4 after that. And I think he's got a new one coming out. So,
well, look, I think that if you can lock in that kind of commitment to having the support that you need, I think that right now independent writers are somewhat overvaluing the loyalty of their audiences. I do think that those audiences are going to be very hard to maintain in a decade-long fashion. Now, there's going to be some of them that are very gifted at doing that. Scalzi may not be one of them.
Right.
So for him,
his books always do well because they put them in hardback. They put them on the front shelf when you walk in the bookstore. He's got his name in big gold letters on every cover. So there's a visual they've developed for his books, and it does well.
Look, I'm kind of tired of this thing of, oh, you should do it my way.
Right.
Just chill out, everybody. From the right-left political thing that we got going on in science fiction to the self-publishing versus traditional publishing, I'm kind of getting tired of it. Like, I'm really tired of build. It really is, to me.
There is no right and wrong. There is no right or wrong.
Writers are cats. They're not dogs. Right? And man, we like to build walls and bury ourselves behind them and say, you stay away because you're not like me. Give me a break. If I had a chance for someone to write me a $4.3 million check, that's a lot of money. Even when my agent takes 10% and you take out all the other stuff that makes it not quite 4.3 million, it's still enough to retire on, right? 4 million in the bank is enough to live on for the rest of your life.
Let's be honest. Scalzi likes this job. He's a good science fiction writer. He likes writing science fiction. He's getting paid to do something he loves. So, good for him.
And he's able to offload editing. He's able to offload, like you said, all the marketing and all that stuff on other people. And again, I think the indie undervalues sometimes how much that can be worth. So, to each their own. And I have had great indie success. I'm very happy with that indie success. But wow.
Yeah.
Congrats to him.
Well, listen, viewers, we went a little long tonight. I hope you'll forgive us. We try to keep these things to about 15 minutes, but this was a good one. I enjoyed talking with you about this, Eric. These are things that we've all experienced, especially the writer myths, and we should address some more writer myths in future episodes. I'm sure we can come up with a nice long list.
Yeah, we could definitely do that. That would be good.
Well, viewers, if you've got any questions or suggestions for future episodes, please go to geekdad.com or ericrex.com, or leave a comment at the iTunes for the iTunes podcast, webcast. What are we calling it? Podcast?
Podcast.
Yeah, we don't call them podcasts. But we'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you like, what you don't like, and what you want us to talk about in the future, and we might give it a shot. So, Eric, it was good talking to you. It's a little late here in Atlanta, but dark. But we'll talk again next week, all right?
Looking forward to it. Take care.
All right, take care. Have a great week.
You too.